I think there's even people that are in the media now, well-intentioned, I guess influencers or thought leaders, men who really care about men and care about these issues, they still end up doubling down on blaming men that they need to do more. There's
Right.
someone, he's a professor at I think NYU, his name's Scott Galloway, and he's out there championing for men. He thinks men are hurting, and he he's really trying to help. Any conversation you see with him talking about,
Mm.
he's more of like a also a professor and a investor and things like that. So he that seems to be more his area of expertise. But he's been speaking a lot towards men or men that are hurting, etc. But every time I see him speak, he continues to double down on this idea that you have to become stronger and wealthy, and that's the way out. And
Right.
and it seems to him just validating what he did to escape some of his pain. Because I've
Okay.
seen him
Yeah.
be on talk shows, which for one sentence he'll say, "You have to be strong and wealthy and industrious and productive and all these things." This next sentence, he's talking about how he tends to gravitate more towards men who are softer and caring and understanding. And I'm like, dude, you are so close to getting this. And it's so
Yeah.
sad because he is so well intentioned, but I see this happening all
Mm.
the time. And one thing that you mentioned about, yeah, it is quite complicated from the things I've read as well for why men have disconnected from emotions. There's actually a book I have right here that I think you'd love called Weeping Britannia,
Oh
and
wow. Okay.
the concept of it's called a portrait of a nation in tears, and because this concept
Wow.
of the stiff upper lip that came
Yeah.
from this colonization time, and that if you were filled with emotion, if you're a man or a woman, you were emotionally incontinent, in which they would say, and there was such a pride around not having emotion, and this idea that if you were more emotional, you could not make decisions. Whereas recently,
Mm.
studies have come out to show that, like, if we have no emotions, we cannot make decisions. Period. This idea of the emotionless, logical man is the most reasonable is complete and utter bullshit. Like, if you get up in the
Mm.
morning and you don't feel like having eggs, you're gonna have cereal.
Mm.
If you
Yeah.
can't have those feelings, you
Yeah.
don't you don't know what to really do. And so I guess what I'd like to know is how could how could any of us help? Like, if men aren't even speaking to their wives that they're in this emotional state, how do we ever know that someone is going down this path? Have you found any ways that we can be the last line of defense, perhaps, to someone who is starting to think about not being around anymore?
Mm. It's such a complicated question to ask because there's so many. I mean, suicide in itself, if we think of like a hierarchy of human behavior, like suicide's right at the top in terms of the complexity of factors that contribute to it. Because in a hierarchy of human behavior, in terms of consequences for doing that behavior, like suicide is right at the top in terms of consequences for if I do suicide, what that means for me as a biological being.
Right.
And I think that every story of suicidal pain is so unique. It's a unique story of someone's biological makeup, of their lived experiences, the environment they grew up in, what maybe happened in the caregiving home or didn't happen, what happened at school, like socioeconomic factors, cultural factors, political factors. There's so many. I think of it as like a cocktail of pain that each of us carry. Everybody's absorbed pain at some point in response to the things that have happened in their lives, and everybody's cocktail is um, unique. But some of the things that we hear from, or that I hear from men in terms of what's helped them, in some ways, Michael, like I really struggle with the word sort of recovery, because I think a lot of men I speak to, and I include myself in this as well, is that it's not that you stop ever having thoughts of suicide, but what you do is you can learn tools and skills to manage them. And I think that there's a big question around externally, what can the people around you and what can we socially and culturally do to help the management of those feelings? And then there's also that question of what can I do? Because I'm the person in it, what can I do to manage it as well?
Right.
And for every single person, that's going to look different. There's going to be different things that help you both um, in the short term, when you're in the thick of a crisis, just manage you moment to moment, getting you kind of one step in front of the other. And then there's
Right.
longer term work that you can do to understand what are the contents of that cocktail of pain that I'm carrying, and how can I reduce the heaviness of that cocktail. Um, but things that we sort of broader kind of ideas that we hear are certainly around emotional regulation. So learning tools to manage your emotional states, learning to reconnect with what you're feeling, learning to understand what the experiences in the past, how they may have shaped your life now, and acting on how you're feeling, revising those like negative and painful feelings of self that a lot of men who are suicidal can carry. um, and a lot of that can often happen in peer support groups.
Hmm.
So meeting other men who've also had experiences of suicide and being able to normalize those feelings, and take out some of the shame, and also encounter like hope-filled role models. So to see other men potentially a bit further ahead on the journey of learning to manage those feelings. Because again, especially in the immediate days after a crisis, a lot of people may be oscillating between wanting to live and still wanting to die, and that can be a very confusing state to be moving between. But when
Right.
you've got other men that have been in that position and are starting to find their own tools for strengthening that muscle of wanting to live, then there's um, I think, hope and optimism in that is so profound. And then also a big thing about finding meaningful connection with other people, whether that's with loved ones or in those sort of peer support communities, or even through things like nature or music or God, but like feeling that a sense of belonging to others. Um, but it is, I think it is, well, one thing, it's so individual what will work for what one person needs, but also we need so much more research to really understand the interventions that are going to work best for how men want to be supported and want to be helped.
Right.
Um, there's still, for me, a big piece of work that needs to happen around that.